Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're getting into it. It's Tyler's topic all day, every day, Metal Gear.
Yes, we're going to talk about some Metal Gear. This one is going to be a multi-part episode, so we're going to be kind of going back and forth between this and Mike doing Zelda for the next few weeks. So if you don't like either of those games, those game series, then we're going to have to be entertaining enough for you to keep listening. And if we're not entertaining enough for you to keep listening, then we'll see you in a few weeks when we talk about something that you like, because we're going into Metal Gear and Zelda the next couple of weeks. And I want to apologize because I have been sick the past few days, so I think that maybe I sound a little sick still. I definitely sound sick in my head when I talk, so just want to get that out there. So
I think you sound great.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. You sound great too.
Oh, thank you.
You've been taking voice lessons?
I have.
You sound great. Oh, your radio voice coming out. But this week, we're going to start our talk about Metal Gear. And I say Metal Gear, not Metal Gear Solid, because there is so much more to this series than just the 5 main Solid games plus Peace Walker. There are a few spin-offs like the Acid series and Survive, which we probably won't talk about Survive. It's a little bit too new. But the series that actually started it all off was a little game on the Japanese computer system called the MSX2. That game was called Metal Gear. Metal Gear. That's how Snake says it. He says it later in the series. Once they give him a voice, he says Metal Gear.
So it's not Metal Gear, it's Metal Gear.
Yeah, it's always got a question mark on it. Metal Gear.
Metal Gear? This feels like a real Ron Burgundy situation.
Yeah. David Hayter reads whatever you put on the script, so that's good and bad. Yeah. So let's back it up real quick here. I'll give a small little TLDL, too long didn't listen, on what the Metal Gear series is. Maybe you've heard of it, but you're like, man, I'm more about paper gear or cloth gear. Metal's too heavy. So let me explain very quickly what we're getting into here. Metal Gear is the story of a few different playable characters named Snake. You've got Naked Snake, who later becomes Big Boss. That's when the series takes place in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. And then when the series is taking place in the 90s and 2000s, you've got Solid Snake. And there's definitely a relationship there. As we go through the series, I'm going to kind of try to avoid spoilers. For the older stuff, I don't feel as bad about spoiling it, but as we get closer into, especially into like Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4, I'm probably going to try to avoid spoilers, even though those are my favorites. It's going to be very hard to do that. But I haven't really decided yet. Anyway, Solid Snake, Naked Snake generally are trying to avoid nuclear war in each game, which is generally being carried out by a walking bipedal tank called Metal Gear. Metal Gear is special because it always has nukes on it. So imagine a giant walking robot that is always threatening to start nuclear war. Not the robot itself. It doesn't have any sort of like weird consciousness, although in Peace Walker it gets very weird. But whoever's in control of the tank, that game, or whoever's trying to get control of Metal Gear is always threatening some kind of nuclear war, or they want to take over the world by having the ability to launch a nuclear missile from anywhere. Like that's the whole thing. Because it walks around, you can launch a nuke from anywhere, and it's very scary because of that.
So it's like a giant mech then.
Yes. So it's like a giant mech.
It's not like if my Roomba decided to start launching nuclear missiles. It's like a mech.
Yeah, it's a very large robot.
Although I think that's the first big boss that John Glames will fight is a Roomba with nuclear missiles on it. Writing it in my notes.
Great. Let's taking these notes down. We're going to make the greatest John Glames video game ever.
It's like we wanted to buy the rights to John Glames, and it turns out they were only like $20.
And it was just some guy in his basement was like, "What? You want? Sure, why not?"
All right, sure.
All right, I guess. Okay. So anyway, you don't want Metal Gear, to fall into the wrong hands, and each game is generally about preventing that from happening. So I want to dive a little bit deeper on the whole giant walking robots things, because that sounds like one of my Japanese animes, as what one of the characters says later on in the series. Otacon, he says. That's one of his lines. That sounds like one of my Japanese animes. And you would be right. This series on the surface, like when you look at it, it kind of appears to be like a realistic military simulator with like real weapons and tactics and stealth and stuff like that. And it's got a thriller storyline that's like very like 24, Kiefer Sutherland kind of thing. It's actually Kiefer Sutherland voices a snake later on in the series. But if you dig in just a little bit deeper, you'll find the truth here. And it's that the Metal Gear series, and especially Metal Gear Solid, is an anime. It's a saga that spans nearly a century's worth of time in the game. It's full of walking battle tanks, men made of fire, psychics, guys with electrical powers, snipers who can kind of talk to wolves, and all kinds of other crazy stuff. So this is not like actually a realistic game.
If you'd have told me it was snipers that can talk to wolves, I would have been in it immediately.
Yeah. So that either turns some people away immediately or it makes it much, much more interesting to other people. And I am one of the people that it is made interesting because of all of this stuff. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff. If you want like some military sim with a realistic story, you're in the wrong place. This is an anime and your suspension of disbelief should reflect that. If you want a stealth game with a more grounded storyline that's a little bit more realistic, check out the Splinter Cell series, which is also a very good series. The stories are not nearly as convoluted as the anime that is Metal Gear. And they are also very good stealth games, so check those games out too. Someday I'll do a history on those games because I really like those as well. So yeah.
You just like being a secret agent.
I do. I really like being a secret agent. I need to play more James Bond games and John Glames games.
Obviously. I mean, it goes without saying. It's like, if you're going to rank them like 4, like it'd be like James Bond, Splinter Cell, Metal Gear, John Glames at the top.
He's at the top
how
of the
it kind of
list.
goes for you? Like,
That's exactly the order it goes for sure.
I just nailed it. All right.
Yeah, you know me so well, Mike. We've been
I'm going to
doing
start
this
trying
show
to
for
learn
a while
to
now.
talk to wolves. That's my next thing for next week. I'll let you guys
right.
know if I can talk to wolves.
You're gonna have to wait till the Metal Gear Solid series for that stuff to come about. But it's like, I don't know if she talks to wolves or if she's just very like has a connection with wolves. It's very weird.
Well, I got to be either got to talk to wolves or I got to become a guy made of fire, and I feel like that would be really hard on the house. You know, just like being
Yeah.
made of fire all the time.
Being made of
would be
fire
rough.
is tough. Yeah.
Not
how are
easy.
your psychic abilities?
They're pretty low. I
Yeah.
mean, I could work on that too if you want. Maybe I should just get some electrical powers. Like I just got zapped from an outlet, and now
There
I
you
can
go. That
zap
seems pretty
people.
realistic.
But not lethally. Just like give them a little bzz, like a little like one of those little like prank devices. You know, that's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah, where you shake someone's hand, they go, ow.
Yeah,
You go,
just like that.
Gotcha. Caused you pain.
Electrical powers.
Yeah, I thought when I was a little kid, I one time plugged in my Super Nintendo, but I was touching the metal prong as I plugged it in, and I definitely shocked myself. And I thought for sure I was going to have electrical powers and was so disappointed when I didn't.
I just did that like yesterday on a smoke detector, and I still don't have electrical powers, and I'm bummed.
Dang.
Big time bummer.
Yeah, well, anyway, back to Metal Gear. Gameplay-wise, you could call this a stealth action game. They're played in the third person, or the earlier games are played from like an overhead perspective. You're usually sneaking around trying not to be seen by enemies. If you're seen by enemies, the game isn't over though, at least on the lower difficulties. You have a chance to take out the people that saw you, run and hide, or depending on the game or scenario, you might have some other options, but generally you're trying not to be seen. I think the most impressive runs of these games actually are the ones that are measured by how few people you kill, not how many. So you have weapons in the game, which are almost always procure on site, meaning you don't start the game with anything. This is so if Snake is captured, the government can, of course, disavow any knowledge of him. This is some pretty deep Black Ops stuff.
Standard Black Ops.
Yeah, but whenever I play these games, I'm always going for a 0 kill score. I want to not kill anybody. So
Pacifist secret agent Tyler
that's right.
Osby.
That's the kind of game you're playing here. The release of this series spans nearly every decade of modern video games. From the first Metal Gear's release in 1987 to the most recent Metal Gear Survive in 2018, there have been a lot of Metal Gear games. So there's the first few games that came out on the MSX2 system in Japan and the NES in other regions. Then the Solid series has been on every generation of PlayStation. Has been on every generation of PlayStation, including the PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation Vita. There's a lot to dig into here if you're into the series, and I am into the series, so we're gonna dig into it.
Get your shovels ready, everybody. It's digging time.
We're going deep into Metal Gear. Also, I can't believe I've gotten this far without mentioning the auteur who designed this series, at least until Survive. He created it and is generally the brain through which all of the things flow, Hideo Kojima. So we have him to thank for this beautiful mess of a series. He is insane. And if you have played Death Stranding recently, that was also a Kojima game. So it's the same mind. And I think that game is pretty weird too. I haven't actually played it, but it seems real weird.
Let's get real weird. I love it.
Yeah, so the original Metal Gear was intended to be an action shoot 'em up for the MSX, but when Kojima took over, he realized that the MSX had a lot of limitations with regards to what can be on the screen at any given time. So if you wanted to make a shoot 'em up, you would need to have like tons of bullets on the screen, tons of enemies and stuff like that. So instead of making a shoot 'em up, he decided to reverse that style, and he made it more about avoiding combat and enemies instead of confronting them head on.
I like that.
Yeah.
What a creative workaround.
Yeah. So you play as, in the first game, Metal Gear, the MSX, you play as Solid Snake, a rookie on his first mission with a group called Foxhound. His commanding officer, Big Boss, guides him over the radio about where to go and what to do next. And he is invading an enemy stronghold called Outer Heaven in an attempt to rescue captured teammates and destroy the walking battle tank known as Metal Gear. As in the later games, there are a few different people that Snake talks to on the radio that help guide him toward key items and people to save. On these games, I'm really not going to avoid spoilers because even if you read the back of the box of later games, you know exactly who the head of Outer Heaven turns out to be. Big Boss, Snake's commanding officer. Dun. Yeah, it's a big reveal, but it's like everybody knows it if you've even looked at the back of the box of any other Metal Gear game. So Big Boss and Outer Heaven plan to use Metal Gear to build a nation for soldiers, a world superpower. Big Boss has been a double agent this whole time, working for the US government and Outer Heaven, and he had Snake sent in as a rookie because he thought he'd be able to capture him and use him to feed bad information to the US military. But he was wrong, because Snake is really good at his job, and the player is really good at Snake's job too.
Hey, you're so good at being a spy.
Yeah. Anyway, you defeat Big Boss, but he's not done. After the credits, Big Boss comes back to say he'll meet Snake again.
Ooh.
Dun, dun, dun. I think it's a pretty complex story, actually, for a game released in the 80s. Generally, video games in the 80s weren't really known for their stories. I mean, there were some like text adventure games that probably went a little heavier on the story. But like graphical action games, the story's like just there just to set up why you're killing all these people. And then they just kind of let you go on your way without giving it much more thought than that. Maybe they put something at the end that like is like, congratulations, you killed all the people. Yay, you saved the world.
Good job.
Yeah. But in Metal Gear, it was different. The story mattered. And there was even a twist in there with Big Boss being the bad guy. It was a big twist.
That would have blown my mind if I was alive in 1987.
Yeah. And there's like foreshadowing and stuff. Like as you go through the game, he starts to like tell you to go places, and there's like traps there and stuff because he's really trying to get you captured. He's starting to get worried that he's not going to be able to do it. So the guy you thought was a good guy the whole time turned out to be a bad guy. That's prize winning stuff right there.
I did not know that at all.
Yeah, well, spoilers.
Hey, I'm okay with it. I'm fine with it.
Were you ever going to play Metal Gear on the MSX?
I don't think so. I have a struggle trying to find that console.
Yeah. It's an old computer system, 8-bit computer system. It was really only popular in Japan, a little bit in Europe, but they did not release this game in the US on the MSX. So the game came out in Japan in July of 1987 for the MSX2, which wasn't really a specific piece of hardware as much it was like it was more of a standard of computers by which so many manufacturers built MSX computers, kind of like PCs today, where it's not, you don't just like buy a PC made by the PC corporation, you buy a Dell or you buy a Gateway or whatever, like they all make the computers that are compatible,
Totally.
Yeah. So due to memory limitations at the time with the computer itself, the game is written using katakana, which is kind of a Japanese sort of alphabet that's different from the normal Japanese system of writing, which I'm not going to be able to do justice to here. It's basically because they had memory issues, they had to use a lesser used Japanese system of writing that takes up less space in the computer's memory.
This is what we talked about at Zelda last episode. This is what they use for Zelda.
Oh, maybe it's like a more wider like video game thing.
Yeah,
or at least
I
it
think
becomes more wider used in video games.
I think it's used in video because it takes up less space. I think that's why. Yeah,
because like
cool.
back in those days, the space, like you would be like, oh no, we need to save space, cut some dialogue from the game because text actually takes up a significant amount of space. And there was so much dialogue in Metal Gear that they had to do it. And I'm sure Matt in Japan can explain how this works so much better than I can. So I'm just gonna stop there.
They used katakana in the first Legend of Zelda game. I'm looking in the old notes I used from last week. Totally.
All right.
That's cool. Hey, a weaving things together here on Codex.
That's
Ooh, we're weaving.
Oh, we're bobbing and weaving.
So much weaving.
The English version of Metal Gear was released in Europe later that same year, and for the same space-saving reasons that they used katakana in the Japanese version, the English version was written in all caps. Like, they just didn't have room for lowercase versions of letters.
So it's all yelling.
Yeah, it's all the whole game. They're just yelling. This ended up still taking up way too much space, though, and they had to cut out almost half of the radio conversations in this version.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah. Wikipedia also says that there are like a ton of spelling and grammar errors in the English version too, so that's probably pretty funny to check out. I kind of want to load up like a really old MSX version. You can still play this version of the game on the Subsistence version of Metal Gear Solid 3. There's like a second bonus disc that has a bunch of bonus features, including the first 2 Metal Gear games. And then there are also these versions are on the HD remakes for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita.
That's awesome. So you can still find places to play them.
Yeah. So, and that's important because the MSX versions are the original versions, but the version that many in North America are familiar with is the NES version, which was released in North America in June of 1988. Now, there's a little bit of drama surrounding this because it was made by a different division at Konami without guidance or consent of the original team. They made a ton of changes, including the very beginning of the game. So in the MSX version, Snake begins his infiltration by coming in like through a sewer or like a waterway. In the NES version, he parachutes in and he comes in from the jungle. Actually, he and like 3 or 4 other people parachute in, and they never mention those other people that parachute in again. We just don't acknowledge that he wasn't the only one that jumped out of that plane, which is very strange.
Died. Very
they
sad.
all died.
Yep,
yeah,
very sad.
They knew that there was a 25% chance of someone surviving, so they threw 4 people out of the plane, and the one that survived is the one that ended up being the one that the game was made about. So even Solid Snake didn't know it was going to be about him until right up until he survived the fall, I guess.
That seems fully justified to me. I'm totally into that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We're figuring this out. It could have been a very different thing if any of those other people survived.
Yeah. I mean, it just like there goes, Liquid Snake and Gas Snake. And
Gaseous Snake.
Gaseous Snake. And then what's the other one? The one that's in between a solid and a liquid.
Solidus Snake.
Solidus Snake.
Those
Sure.
are in Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2. There is a Liquid Snake and a Solidus Snake.
They didn't want to say gas because they just thought it'd be weird.
Snake.
It's a gassy snake. It's like, guys, stop.
I can't help it.
It's not my fault.
What's funny is the sewer version is reflected in Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation. That game begins with Snake infiltrating a place through like a waterway. And the jungle version is reflected in Metal Gear Solid 3 on the PlayStation 2. They do a Snake parachutes in and barely survives, and that's how they make Metal Gear. That's how they begin Metal Gear Solid 3. So there's like little callbacks even to the nearly unauthorized version of the NES. It was authorized by Konami. It just didn't involve the original team.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Do
In
a little
reality,
throwback.
the people working on the NES version of the game were actually instructed to make it as different from the MSX version as possible, which is kind of strange to me. But the NES version is missing a bunch of different enemy types. A bunch of bosses are changed from their MSX counterparts as well. And like you don't even fight Metal Gear in the NES version. You fight like a spider bot boss.
Weird.
Yeah, so the whole game is about not like it's still called Metal Gear, but it's not about Metal Gear. So
Should have been called Spider Gear.
Spider Gear, Spider Bots.
Mm-hmm. Spider Bots.
The NES version is the only version released in North America until there was an MS-DOS version and a Commodore 64 port of the game, both of which were based on the NES version as well. So if you're playing those versions, you're playing the worst version, I guess. Later entries in the series use the MSX version as canon, so the NES version shouldn't be played with the hope of like getting more detail on the story. If you want that, stick with the MSX version from Japan or Europe, preferably the ones from like the HD collection or Subsistence. Because you don't even fight Metal Gear. What?
Yeah, it doesn't even seem right. It seems kind of like a betrayal to the fans.
Yeah, I agree. You can find both the NES and the MSX versions in the Virtual Console for the Wii, I think. You may need to make like a Japanese account to get to the MSX version. And they hold up pretty well. I mean, as well as any other game made from the area, from that era of games. Like, they play fine, but they have a lot of like design sensibilities from those days that can make them kind of a bit of a slog. I'd love to see a proper remake of the original Metal Gear, since it's actually very important to the overall story of Metal Gear. But we've only seen like ports and emulations so far. So maybe we'll get a remake someday. I don't know.
Someday. You never know.
I hope so. In Japan, the first Metal Gear sold incredibly well, remaining in the top 20 for 5 months, according to MSX Magazine. It also got really good reviews, even the stripped-down NES version, which was enough to greenlight a sequel. Actually,
Ooh.
2 sequels. And I don't mean a trilogy like a sequel and then another sequel. I mean 2 sequels at the same time.
Weird.
Yeah, released very closely together. So, the first was called Snake's Revenge. That's it, just Snake's Revenge. Some like publications, like magazines at the time, called it Snake's Revenge Metal Gear 2, but officially it's just called Snake's Revenge. This game only came out in North America and Europe on the NES, and that should tell you a lot about it, because Kojima and his team didn't have any involvement in that game whatsoever, and therefore it has no place in Metal Gear canon. It has no bearing on the overall story. So if you're trying to get into this Metal Gear series for the story, don't play Snake's Revenge. It means nothing. I don't want to spend too much time on it because of that. It's like basically an authorized, unauthorized Metal Gear game. But it is interesting that it was made at all, I think. It's very similar to the original Metal Gear, gameplay-wise. The story's similar, only this time a hostile nation in the Middle East has gotten plans for Metal Gear and is planning to build a Metal Gear to take over the world. So in true 80s and 90s fashion, the enemy turns out to be a cybernetically enhanced version of Big Boss from the first game. So he's back and he wants revenge. Of course, Snake destroys him, avoids global nuclear war, and it's all good. This game was actually fairly well received too, with even Kojima admitting later, like way later, that it wasn't a bad game. But it's not canon, doesn't truly continue the story of Metal Gear. For that, we have to look at Kojima's next production, which is appropriately called Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. And we should thank those people who made Snake's Revenge, though, because it inspired Kojima to make a real sequel when he was told that they were making like a sequel without him. He was like, wait a minute, I'm going to make a real sequel. So
we might not even have more Metal Gear if it wasn't for these people trying to make a weird sequel.
That's right. Yeah. So Snake's Revenge came out in April of 1990 in North America and then later on in 1992 for Europe. But the true sequel, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, was released just months later in Japan only on July 20th, 1990. And that game wouldn't be playable outside of Japan until it was included on the second disc of Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence for the PS2. So it's like a special Japan-only continuation of the Metal Gear story. It was released again on the MSX2 computer system, same as the original Metal Gear. But in Solid Snake, Kojima went a lot bigger. There are a lot of people on the internet that say it's one of the greatest 8-bit games ever made, and I'm very sad to say now that I've been researching this, that I've never actually played this game because, it's not really easy to come by in North America. Although I do own Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, so maybe I don't really have an excuse.
That means you own it, right? Because it's like on the extra disc?
Yeah, I do. So I could play it, I guess. Anyway.
Getting that 8-bit. Get your 8-bit on.
Maybe I will. I want to find an MSX computer now that I built a workbench this weekend. So I'm gonna be like fixing up old computers. I should like try to find an MSX computer and see if I can.
I feel like you can.
Yeah, probably. I have to get a European version that uses English, probably.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
Anyway, in Metal Gear 2, Snake heads to an area called Zanzibar Land, which I believe has no relation to the Zanzibar map in Halo 2.
Unfortunately.
Right. He goes there to rescue a scientist and destroy Metal Gear D. Metal Gear D is, you guessed it, a beefed up version of the original Metal Gear, and it's up to Snake to destroy it and, once again, prevent the nuclear destruction of the world.
What happened to Metal Gears B and C?
They got blown up at the same time, I guess. I don't know.
Or maybe they just skipped straight to D.
Yeah. Because they knew.
They just fall apart.
Yeah.
Jump cut to Metal Gear B just falling over. Oh, man.
Oh, man.
Metal Gear D was the only one we got walking, so we had to keep that one.
The gameplay in Metal Gear 2 is an extension of the original's gameplay. This time, it allowed guards to patrol more than one screen, so like they could leave and go to different sections of the game. And they also had a wider viewing angle that they could detect Snake in. They actually, if they had a viewing angle, it was like a 45-degree angle, like a cone in front of them. Snake can also crouch and go prone, which allows him to make less noise at the cost of movement speed. That's another thing that this game introduced, was the idea of like enemies hearing you or sound. So you would go crouch or prone to make less noise and move slower. Lots of these elements would be extended to Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, and then in just a few years. But Kojima really honed in on the stealth gameplay here, and he elevated it like way beyond what it was in the first game. So
dude, it blows my mind that they came out with these kind of like, I guess, gameplay elements in an 8-bit version of the game.
Yeah,
like the crouching and the prone. Like I just assumed that would have come at the PlayStation version.
Yeah, no, the PlayStation version is basically, like gameplay-wise, it's like a 3D version of Metal Gear 2, which is crazy.
That is crazy. Now I'm curious. I'm going to watch some YouTube videos.
Yeah, they really nailed it in Metal Gear 2. The storyline takes place in 1999, which is 4 years after the events of the first Metal Gear. And this one is way more complex than the first game, so it requires a little bit of setup here. So the storyline here is, following the events of Metal Gear 1, there's a massive oil crisis in the world. The world is running out of oil, and they haven't been able to reduce their dependency on oil in time to make a dent in how fast they're using the remaining stock of oil. So, Dr. Keo Marv invents a type of algae called oilix that can create oil cheaply and effectively. And he intends to take the formula to the World Energy Conference in Prague, but he gets kidnapped by soldiers from Zanzibar land, which Zanzibar land is a country that was formerly part of the Soviet Union, but then fought an independence war, became its own country. They plan to use oilix and old nuclear fuel, of course, because there's a nuclear part of the storyline, to take over the world. They basically want to control the world's oil supply by having control over the oilix algae. So Snake infiltrates Zanzibar land, saves a few scientists, discovers that his old friend Gray Fox from the first game is running the newly built Metal Gear D tank. He fights Gray Fox both inside and then outside of Metal Gear, and then he's back. Big Boss.
Oh no.
He's got to fight him in like a minefield in order to maintain world order. So he defeats Big Boss, he gets the oilix formula safely out of the hands of the bad guys and into the hands of the good guys. So all is well, probably. Who knows who the good guys and bad guys are in the Metal Gear saga. You know, it's very gray.
That's a real roller coaster ride of emotions I just went through with you.
Yeah, it gets real weird later.
I'm so excited for when we get weird later.
So this game was also very well received by the gaming press, it being the absolute height of the series in its 2D format. The gameplay was carried over pretty faithfully into Metal Gear Solid, like I said earlier, and it still holds up in that form to this day, in my opinion. I think the original Metal Gear Solid stands up pretty well gameplay-wise. The graphics have not aged well, but the gameplay, I think, still is fine. And Metal Gear 2 is basically where that game came from. Even the story in Metal Gear Solid is like a half remake of the story from Metal Gear 2. So they like to retell sort of the same story over and over in Metal Gear games, which is like in different ways. And like later games will sort of use that like in the story as part of, it's like this recursive, like part of the story is trying to recreate the events of the original Metal Gear. It's very strange. We'll get there. We'll get there. But not today.
I'm so excited. We should just have an episode titled Metal Gear Solid. This is where it gets weird.
Yeah. So fun fact, in the original version of this game, Snake's portrait for the radio calls looked a lot like Mel Gibson. They changed this for later re-releases because it was a pretty close resemblance. If you look at the artwork for a lot of the 80s and early 90s Metal Gear games, for Metal Gear 1 and 2, I guess that is, it's very like 80s action hero. It's like got like, it looks like almost like Sylvester Stallone's on the cover. It's like Rambo or the Terminator, like Arnold. Because that was like the cool thing at the time, was to be like this buff, like military guy going in, shooting the place up and then saving the people, like Die Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Konami really cashed in on that action hero hype. So While these two games are largely forgotten in the overall timeline of Metal Gear games, mostly because they were released a long time before the series really took off with Metal Gear Solid, they're still important because they lay the foundation for stealth games to come after, and the story is still pretty important to how things play out in the Metal Gear Solid series, especially the first Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 5. And I don't mind spoiling the stories of the first two games because I think it's kind of tough to go back and play them, and also I think a basic summary is sort of enough to get you to the good stuff in the later Metal Gear Solid games. But as we move forward through the series, I'll become less likely to spoil things. Metal Gear Solid is like 20 years old at this point, so I don't feel that bad about spoiling it. But I do think that a lot of the magic in later Metal Gear Solid games can be ruined if you know what's coming. So for like 3 and 4 especially, I'm going to try to avoid major spoilers because I think everybody should play this series, especially if you like ridiculous storylines. It's just realistic enough to grab your attention, but then the further you dig in, the more weird the storyline gets, but in a good way, I think. So this is a series where it's like easy to find things to hate if you're looking for a reason to not like it. Like it would be very easy to see the story and go, wow, this is ridiculous. I cannot get into this, if that's what you're trying to do. But if you just let it get you, if you just like put that aside and just go with it, I think you can have a really good time playing these games. So that's what I wanted to cover this week was Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake and a little bit of Snake's Revenge. So we'll save the first Metal Gear Solid for next time. Mike, what you been playing?
I have not had a lot of time to play games this week, which is kind of a bummer. But when I have, I've been sneaking my Switch. Just been pulling my Switch out, playing Zelda.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so fun. I'm still exploring the world and trying to unlock all the towers. It's really good. It's so good. I actually am in the desert land right now. That's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, yeah.
Just bought a bunch of fruit so I can walk through the desert because I think I have to have the fruit. Otherwise, it get too hot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. It's really fun, though. And I'm playing Destiny with you, obviously.
Yeah.
Really having a good time trying to get that title.
Yeah, we're going to get that Dawn title. We got to do the raid soon, like actually finish it because we never finished it.
Oh, yeah, we never finished it. That's right. We should do that. Well,
yeah.
We got to do that. That's on the old to-do list. We got
it's
time.
on the list. We got plenty of time.
What you been playing
for the title? I've been playing. So I finished Link's Awakening. I think I talked about that last week, but I've been in my gaming time, which I haven't been spending as much time gaming because like I said, I just built a new workbench. So I've been trying to work on some old computers and get that like situated. So I've been spending a lot of time there. But for the games that I have been playing, I'm still working on finishing World of Final Fantasy. I think I'm at the final boss now.
Ooh.
Because the main like fairy character that's sort of your guide in the game, it was like, hey, it's final boss time. Like literally said those words, basically. It's like, hey, it's time for the final fight. So...
and then did you start the fight and they're like, hey, I hope you have 3 hours. Here we go.
No, I just assumed that's how it's going to go. And I was like, I don't have time for this right now. But I'm very, very close to finishing that game. So hopefully, like if it turns out that the boss is really hard and I got to go back and do some grinding, there's a very good chance that I say, you know what, look up that ending on YouTube and call it good.
Yeah, it sounds like it's become kind of a slog a little bit.
Yeah, well, I've been working on it since it came out on the PS4 in like 2016, and then I started over when it came out on Switch, and now I'm like almost done, and I just feel like I need to see it through to the end,
Jeez. Oh, man. Well, you know what? I just want to let you know that I support you, and so does the whole audience.
Oh, thanks, Mike and audience.
You're welcome. I'm also speaking for the audience. I think they're fine with that, though. I think
Hopefully.
It's okay with them.
Yeah.
It's got to be fine. Do you want to go through some emails?
Yeah, we got a few emails in our inbox. Mike's got a few emails he wants to read as well. The first email comes from Old Man Ryan. He says, hey guys, Old Man Ryan here. He says he's 35, which is not that old. I feel like I'll be there soon enough. But I just finally caught up to all the episodes, and I was going to email last week, but I forgot. And I was going to suggest a Zelda episode, and lo and behold, you were ahead of me. Zelda 2 was my very first game, and I bought it with my own cash as a young 5 or 6-year-old from KB Toys. And I'm glad you guys didn't tear the game apart. It's still my favorite one.
Also, rip KB Toys.
Rip KB Toys. Yeah, I remember the mall near in my town. It used to have a KB Toys. I remember right where KB Toys was, and every time I go to that mall, and it's something different every time because I don't go there very often, and I'm like, used to be KB Toys. It was like the small Toys R Us.
Yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah, I bought a copy of F1 Race for my Game Boy at KP Toys. That's all I remember. It came with a 4-port like link adapter that I never used.
Classic Game Boy link adapters. Just Game Boy adapters in general. There were so many.
I just thought it was so cool because it came in a box that was the size of a Super Nintendo game box, not a Game Boy game box, and I figured it must be way better because of that. It wasn't.
Oh,
It was just a game. It was just a game. It was fine. Anyway, Ryan's got a little bit more to his email here. Think you guys will ever delve deeper into like Phantasy Star or Shining Force, perhaps video game shows from the 90s and early 2000s? Before I started the podcast, I just finished up all 4 seasons of an early mid-90s UK-based one called Bad Influence. It oozes with 90s nostalgia. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to more of the podcast and to see the Jay Bird 2020 Championship on ESPN 8.
That's what we all want to see. Thank you, Ryan. Do you want me to read
love
mine
to
now?
see that.
All right,
Sure.
this first one's from Jason. Jason says, "Hey guys, I just finished your episode about James Bond games. I just wanted to mention that you missed a great game from that time that was an alternate to GoldenEye. No, it's not Perfect Dark. It was Winback. It was amazing and did come out in 99, but was definitely a great multiplayer at the time. And no worries, I understand there are too many games to put into one podcast. Just wanted to put this one out there if you get a chance to check it out. Also, thank you for making these podcasts. I am hooked, Jason." You know what? Thank you, Jason. I wrote Winback on our list. It's on there. We're going to discuss it as a team someday.
Could do like a video game book club where we both play Winback.
We could do that. It'd be fun. It'd be nice to do.
Yeah.
Only for an hour, though. Games are so long, you know.
Yeah. I do want to, back to answering Ryan's question here, delving deeper into something like Phantasy Star, I would love to do, because I played a little bit of Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast back in the day. Not a lot, but a little bit. And I generally like those like, I know Phantasy Star Online is very different from the rest of the Phantasy Star series, but I would be interested in going a little bit deeper into that, or Shining Force, which is another like JRPG series from around that time, I think. So yes, I would love to do that, maybe someday. Anyway.
We will, Ryan, for you.
Yeah.
Do you want to do the next one?
Sure. This one's from Jimmy. It says, "Hey guys, I found your podcast around September last year and absolutely loved it. Binged all the episodes in about a week or 2. Wow, that's crazy. Great to listen to during slow work days."
That's a whole lot of me, you know?
Yeah.
That's way too much me, personally. That's how I feel.
Yep. I don't even listen to myself that much. Anyway, I wanted to share 2 gift moments that were very special to me. First, on my 6th birthday in 1996, I got my first video game console. My parents got me the NES, and since it was pretty old at that point, they could afford to get me like 5 to 6 games at the same time. I specifically remember getting Super Mario Bros. 3 and Batman: Return of the Joker. Even though they had invited all of the neighborhood kids to a party, I pretty much ignored them and just played those 2 games the entire day. Been hooked on games ever since. Then, on New Year's Eve, 1997, we were at a party where someone owned an N64 and GoldenEye 007. Me and my best friend played it all night and loved every second of it. My parents understood how much I loved it, and then on Christmas 1998, I got an N64 bundled with GoldenEye 007 and Super Mario 64. Loved it so much.
Ooh.
In the beginning, I remember my dad always sitting next to me when I played it. I wanted him to translate all the text because I didn't understand a thing. I'm from Sweden and I hadn't started learning English in school yet. It was great and we bonded a lot during that time. Sorry for the wall of text. Thanks for the great podcast. Thanks, Jimmy. Those are great stories.
Yeah, and thank you for the wall of text. I enjoyed it. It was wholesome and fun.
And thanks for listening in Sweden. If you're still in Sweden, I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. We got. Want me to do my email now? The next one?
Sure.
We have 5 today. So, all right. Roy actually sent us a lot of stuff. He sent us so much stuff. But he had this one. I'm just going to skip around, and I grabbed this one thing he put in here. It's under random other stuff. He said, "You mentioned the Pokemon glitch for Pokeballs, but I didn't hear about the missing no number glitch to duplicate items on Phantasy Star or the Xbox version duplicating items." But he also said that one time people found drugs in a Nintendo cartridge. I had never heard this story. Okay, so it's actually a Kotaku article. If you want to look it up for yourself, it's called "Game Collector Finds Drugs Hidden in NES Cartridges." The 2 games they bought were roller games and golf, which actually I guess are, if you're collecting NES games, like a little harder to find, supposedly, I guess. but so you have to find these like very specific ones to collect all of them. But they're like, why are these cartridges so heavy? And it's because there were 100% drugs inside, like bags, shiny bags of drugs.
Holy moly.
I guess they've been in there a while because they obviously called the police right away, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to charge you with anything. Obviously, these drugs have been in here forever. But they're like, why are these NES cartridges so heavy? So thank you, Roy, for sharing that. It was just fun, random news. Made me laugh, maybe giggle.
Wow, that's crazy. Imagine.
Yeah, I know, right?
And then how did they get left in there? Like somebody put them in there and then just like forgot about them?
Yeah, they put the drugs in there and then they screwed the NES case back together and they just didn't think about it.
They sold the games and they were like, oh, crap.
Oh, no, my drugs were in there. How can I enjoy NES's golf without drugs? Oh, man. You want to read the last email?
Yeah, we got one more from Matt in Japan here. He's got a good pro tip for us. Hey, Mike and Tyler, regarding your talk about the improved sound channels of the Famicom Disk Systems versions of Zelda and Zelda 2 and how American gamers missed out on them, a quick tip for the listeners. If you have a Nintendo Switch and are subscribed to the Nintendo Switch online service, you can actually access the Japanese Famicom and Super Famicom libraries, which include the enhanced sound versions of Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 at no additional charge. All you have to do is make a Japanese eShop account, use that to download the Nintendo Switch Online Famicom app, then open up the app with your American or your main account that has the online subscription. Doing so also gives you access to some Japan-only games that aren't in the American library, as well as harder versions of games that are available in both regions. For example, Super Mario Bros. 3 in the American version, if you had the Fire Flower, the raccoon suit, something better than just the large Mario, and you got hit by an enemy, you just downgrade to Big Mario. But in the Japanese version, if you had the higher upgrades, when you got hit, you went all the way back to Small Mario. So,
whoa, it is hard mode.
Yeah, thanks for the pro tip, Matt in Japan. Really appreciate it.
I would enjoy playing that. All right, we actually got 3 reviews since I think I did reviews a while ago. I skipped it last week on accident because I had a lot of emails. So I want to go through. Thank you, everyone who's giving us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. This is where I read them from. So the first one is from Mo, and Mo says, love these guys. I'm 40 episodes in, and this is easily my favorite podcast. Tyler and Mike are super chill, funny, and passionate about gaming. In the earlier episodes, they take you through Stephen L. Kent's book, The Ultimate History of Video Games, which is full of really interesting tidbits. Commentary from Tyler and Mike keep it fresh and fun. After finishing the book, they break off into their own format, covering top 10 game lists and history for each console, later also covering individual game developers or game series. I love it because they actually explain our podcast in a review, which is what you're supposed to do, which is really nice. They're giving people context if people haven't seen the show or listen to the show. You know, you can watch your iPhone while you listen to us if you really want to. That's fine. They continue on saying, Mo says, I'm fascinated by the gaming info, but I'm often laughing out loud in my car as I listen on my way to work. In episode 12, Tyler talks about a recent expansion of World of Warcraft and how it can be difficult to start a new character and really get into the game. Wow, quote, wow is great once you're 200 hours in, but for now, we just need you to go get some spider butts. I laughed harder than I've laughed in a long time at that line. I cackled in my car about 3 minutes straight. Not sure why I found that so funny. Haha. Highly recommended podcast. Spider Butts, Mo from Florida. Thank you, Mo. The spider butts. That's like the joke of the podcast.
Man.
Mm-hmm. Just wanted you to know that, Tyler. That's great. Next one is from Dubtendo64. Amazing. These guys are great. I've learned so much about Nintendo games and other things I never even knew existed. I highly recommend you check them out. Oh, thank you, Dubtendo. Finally, Trombone Player says, excellent. These guys are so easy to listen to. I was caught up in 2 weeks. If you want to know the background and history to your favorite game or company, this is for you. Thank you, Trombone Player. I love the way you play trombone. It's beautiful.
Do a history of trombone.
The history of trombone. We just break off into history of just normal things. We run out of video game stuff. That's never going to happen. There's always going to be video game stuff. Oh, man. Well, yeah, that's the episode this week, team. If you want to rate and review us on anything you listen to podcast-wise, we'd really appreciate it. It'd be very nice to do. With Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, whatever you do. We would love it. Also, you can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And you can find us on Twitter. Right, Tyler?
Yeah.
You're on Twitter at SneakerElf, ELPH. Mm-hmm. And I'm on Twitter at Mikoletta. And I think that pretty much covers it. So next week, we're going to dive right back into The Legend of Zelda. I hope you're all amped for it. I'm amped for it.
I'm so excited.
We're also going to play the first Legend of Zelda game we're gonna play it. Well, we're gonna go into the first one I ever played, which is Link's Awakening.
All right.
On Game Boy, the remake. That's what I played. Right? Or isn't it Link's Awakening, the DX one?
Oh, yeah. That was like a sort of a remake, more of just like an enhanced version for the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, that's when I played for Game Boy Color. It was so fun. Anyway, we'll get into it more next week, even the other editions of it. But thank you so much for listening. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.